Medurstand. Understanding Medicine.
Welcome back, Professor Aziz-ur-Rehman again. And this is actually part two of the same video, which was initially meant to be one, but I divided into two. So it is very, very strongly recommended that you first watch the first part of this video on ectopics. And that covered the basic concept, atrial premature beats and junctional premature beats. And in this video, I'm going to continue the same lesson and we will be talking about ventricular premature beats. So I think this is actually the module part 2. Okay. So this is the ECG. I assume that you have watched earlier parts, so I will not be discussing the basic thing which I've covered in the earlier videos. So let's examine this ECG, and this is the sinus, this is the rhythm strip. If you see, this is this PQRS, 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 nice PQRS coming on regular intervals. But suddenly you notice something which is very different. You see a depolarization which is very different from normal sinus speed. How it is different? It is different because it is much broader and it is much bigger and it is followed by a ST and DT, which are again of different morphology, and it has come earlier than its expected time. So there is something going on. And since these leads are recorded simultaneously, the same electrical phenomenon he is recorded here is actually depicting in these leads also. So there is just one ectopic activity which is shown in all leads. So this is what should draw your attention. And I will also like to draw your attention on this little arrow, this little deflection. What do you think it could be? This one is a P wave preceding QRS complex. This one is P wave. This is perhaps a T wave. Yes, this is the T wave. This wave is T wave of this complex. P wave was expected sometime later. What could this beat be? This little notch here, visible here, visible here, visible here. This is actually sinus P wave. Now this is actually a ventricular premature beat, as I will soon disclose and I'll show you. But these small notches which follow QRS complex but which coincide with the expected P wave, they are normal P waves. So in ventricular premature beats, since ventricular depolarization never goes back to the atria, as far as atrial rhythm is concerned, as far as sinus node activity is concerned, it is as if nothing happened. So there was an ectopic activity arising from ventricles which depolarized ventricle, and while ventricles were depolarized, sinus beat came. It did not penetrate into the ventricles because ventricles were already depolarized, so it only manifested in the form of a small P wave, not followed by a QRS complex. So if you see the pattern, and if you have already, we have covered bundle block patterns, and this looks like uh, in this V6, this is V5 or V6, the pattern of QRS complex is that of left bundle branch block. In a left bundle branch block, what happens is that the current flows from right to left. Since left bundle is blocked, current will flow from right to left, and you will have this kind of morphology. So if there is an ectopic arising from the right ventricle, it would manifest the same way as if there is left bundle branch block. So you can see that this is an ectopic focus which is perhaps coming from the right ventricle. So the diagnosis is ventricular premature beat. Okay. Now let me give you the criteria and then I will explain all these points one by one. Criteria are a ventricular premature beat is premature. That means it comes earlier than its expected time, and this beat has come earlier than its expected time. The beat was actually expected, sinus beat was expected somewhere here after this period, and is broad because ventricular depolarization has not occurred through the normal conduction pathway, which is meant and which is designed to conduct current very fast. This current has supplied through normal myocardium and those fibers which are not designed to transmit current in the fast way. So the QRS complex will be broad and will be of different morphology because normal morphology of QRS is based on a specific pattern of depolarization from AV node downward through both bundles. In this case, it is an ectopic focus arising from somewhere and that depolarizes ventricles in an abnormal direction, in an abnormal way. So that is why everything will be different. The complexes will be premature and it will be broad and it will be of different morphology. And that is the hallmark of ventricular premature beats. And whenever the principle says, whenever depolarization is abnormal, repolarization has to be abnormal because actually depolarization, repolarization are two components of one electrical phenomenon. We, for our understanding, for the description, we have divided into two, but actually they are two components of one whole cycle of depolarization and repolarization. So whenever there is abnormal depolarization, as depicted here in the form of abnormal QRS complex, STT had to be abnormal. So that is why T wave and this inverted and ST depression is there. P wave may appear after QRS. Now this P wave appears after QRS on ECG. It has got nothing to do with this QRS. This QRS is of ventricular region. This P wave is of atrial region. It just happened to follow QRS complex because this was its expected time. Ventricular premature beat came earlier. So that is why P wave actually followed QRS complex. This is not a retrogradely conducted P wave. That concept I will explain sometime later. But this is actually normal sinus beat happened to follow QRS complex because QRS complex came earlier. Morphology of right bundle branch block or left bundle branch block depending upon where the ectopic focus is. Now, in this case, we have figured out since this is left bundle branch block pattern, the ectopic focus may be in the right ventricle. Why should it matter? Because right ventricular ectopics are of lesser seriousness than the left ventricular ectopics. Then there is a full compensatory pause. And I told you when we were discussing APC that this concept I will explain later because here we have to compare APCs and VPCs, atrial premature beats and ventricular premature beats. So I thought let me first do ventricular premature beats and then we will cover this concept. And I think in next couple of slides I will explain what is meant by compensatory pause. Now to explain the concept further with the help of a picture, I'm going to show you this picture. So this is a case. So this was not exactly this person, another person. There is an ectopic focus say in here, left ventricle apex. Now this would produce a current, a depolarization wave which goes this way because this is the side of the myocardium. Of course, it will have to go to the direction of the rest of the myocardium. It will spread in all directions, this way, and this way. It will depolarize the entire ventricle, but the net flow of current would be this one, and that would be shown on ECG, and this would perhaps show as a right bundle branch block pattern. So, and note this would depolarize ventricle, but there is a block. This is normal block. AV node would only allow current to pass this way in normal circumstances. So this depolarization will not be able to enter atria. So that explains that for atria nothing happened, like something happened in your neighborhood you never got to know, like this. So this ventricle will be depolarized, and for atria, atrial activity occurred, it created a beat, but it could only depolarize atria, which appeared as a small notch after the QRS complex. It could not go to the ventricle. It could enter, but it found ventricle in the state of refractoriness because of this ectopic. So ventricle would not respond and would not produce a QRS arising from the P wave of the sinus origin. So this is actually what is I hope I was able to explain. I hope I have not made things more complicated. So there will be full compensatory pause. Let's proceed further. Okay. What is this? Very simple. If you see this beat, what do you say? Is this normal sinus? Yes, it is. Though it has got a broad complex, and if you see V1, it has a pattern of right bundle branch block. So this guy probably has pre-existing right bundle branch block, and these beats are sinus beat. This one, there is a P wave, there is a QRS complex conducted as a right bundle branch block. So these are sinus beat. This is sinus beat, this is sinus beat, this is sinus beat. But this beat, this one has different morphology, and it has come earlier than its expected time. So it is a ventricular extrasystole, ventricular premature beat. Actually, premature beat is better word than extrasystole because it is not extra. Why it is not extra? Because this ectopic beat has replaced an expected normal sinus beat here. This one came earlier, but it was the normal expected sinus beat did not come. So it is not excited. The number of beats in people with ectopics is perhaps the same as the person without ectopics. Now, if these ventricular ectopics come with the frequency that every sinus beat is followed by a ventricular ectopics, like here, like here, like here. And if you examine the pulse, it would be as if two pulses come in couplets in Bigeminy. So this phenomenon was initially defined as Bigeminy. Bigeminy is nothing more than VPCs, or it could be actually atrial bigeminy also. So it is nothing more than extrasystoles or premature beats coming in such a frequency that every sinus beat is followed by a ectopic. So just another form of ventricular ectopics here. What is this? Very similar, but here two sinus beat followed by one ectopics. Two sinus beat followed by one ectopics. The same ECG here. So this would be called a trigeminy. So you have the impression that three beats, a cycle of three beats repeat itself. So it's a trigeminy. Now I'm going to explain the concept of compensatory pause in this slide and in the next slide. Now this bar shows normal PP interval or RR interval. Let's see. It could be PP. If I move this line little on this direction corresponding with the P wave, it would be called PP. But actually this is the same as the PP would be. And the next beat was, this is the QRS complex, and the next one was expected here. Why it did not come? Because of this ventricular depolarization, which depolarized ventricles but did not enter atria. Atrial depolarization here, this could not produce a QRS complex because the ventricles were refractory. So a sinus depolarization of ventricle was dropped here, because for atria it is as if nothing happened. The next atrial would be expected at its normal time. So next QRS will come at its normal time. Since this longer interval compensates for this shorter interval, it is called fully compensatory. This is what is the traditional explanation. Actual explanation is that since for atria nothing happened, atrial depolarization and the ventricular depolarization resulting from atrial the sinus beat would come at its expected time. So this extra time will fully compensate this short time. This is what is meant by full compensation. Now this is how you see when you see a strip. I think this you take a piece of paper. This is how we used to do it, and I think you can also do the same way. You just pick up a piece of paper. This white is a piece of paper, and you put it on three adjacent R waves. You see these small lines I've drawn. This one, this one, this one. 3 A, B, C. So if rhythm is regular, if you move this paper one step to the right, next complex, they will again correspond with these R waves because R waves are coming at their normal intervals. Now then you move a step further, then this is normal beat, this is normal beat. Here normal beat was expected, and this is the ventricular depolarization, and this again C correspond to normal beat. That confirms that this is fully compensated PR interval, the PP interval. So this is this we see in ventricular ectopics. In ventricular ectopics, we see full compensatory pause. Reason? Atrial depolarization goes on uninterruptedly. But the story is slightly different when we talk about the atrial premature beats. Now this is a case where we just happen to have both atrial as well as ventricular premature beat. So I'm going to show you compensatory versus non-compensatory pause. Now this bar from this P to this P, including this one, is 2 pp, right? And this was an ectopic, premature atrial conduction, this one. And if we draw a line here, this P and this P, this does not correspond to this P. So this one has come earlier. It is not fully compensating. Why it has come earlier? Because this atrial premature beat depolarized atria, including SA node. So you cannot say that for SA node nothing happened. This ectopic atrial depolarization reset the SA node. So once SA node is reset, further impulse formation will start, and it will come when it was due but before the next beat. So from here the SA node is depolarized, and in the SA node the new impulse will start forming, and this PP interval is the normal PP interval. That is why it is not fully compensatory. But when we compare it with the ventricles, and in ventricles it is fully compensatory. This one corresponds with the P wave. Okay, and this one actually might include what is called recovery time. So I think let's not make things more complicated. You just remember one thing: in ventricular premature beats, there is full compensatory pause, but in atrial premature beat, there is no full compensatory pause. Reason: in ventricles, SA node activity goes on uninterruptedly, but in atrial premature beats, SA node activity is shut and is reset, and then next beat is the next the atrial the SA node activity comes with the after normal PP interval. What is this? Would you call it APC, atrial premature beat, or ventricular premature beat? It definitely looks like ventricular premature beat. But what about compensatory pause? If I hide this one, this portion, then it is as if nothing happened. This is normal sinus, normal sinus, normal sinus, normal sinus. If you hide this one. So as if nothing happened. This one is called interpolated VPC. Interpolated VPC, as the name says, is a ventricular premature contraction which interpolates between two sinus activities without disturbing the basic rhythm. So if the ventricular ectopic activity occurs at a time when ventricles have recovered from the previous sinus depolarization but has recovered, and the next beat, by the time next beat came, the ventricle had recovered from this depolarization refractoriness caused by ectopic. So if that happens, you would have interpolated VPCs. The significance is the same as the VPCs, but this is likely to come earlier. You see, this comes on the downslope of the T wave. This could be serious, and I'll explain to you shortly. What is the criteria of interpolated VPC? A VPC interpolated between two sinus complexes without disturbing the basic rhythm, truly an extrasystole. So this is like an extrasystole because we have normal beat and this is an additional. Now this slide explains to you the difference between premature beat and ectopic beat, both of ventricular region. Premature beat, if this is normal RR, and this one has come earlier. This bar has the same length as this one. I actually copied and pasted. So next beat was expected here. This has come earlier and this would be called a premature beat. But if you apply the same principle here, this is the normal and the next one was expected here. Since SA nodal activity did not occur, that is why an ectopic pacemaker took over and this would be called SK beat. The morphology of premature beat and ectopic beat is the same, if the origin of both the same, but the timing is different. SK beat comes after a normal sinus beat is missed. Now I'm going to explain to you one very important concept called R on T, and this is what can trigger a ventricular tachycardia or atrial tachycardia. Now this is the person and this is an ectopic beat. But see, this ectopic beat has come very early after the sinus beat on the downslope of the T wave. And it went just uncomplicated here, but the same thing happened here. This was actually an ectopic beat which triggered this tachycardia. And how that happens, that I'm going to explain. This is called R on T. If any depolarization, whether it is spontaneous or it comes from as a result of, for example, DC shock, any depolarization which happen to fall on the downslope of the T, if any R referring to any electric current, falls on the T wave, usually the downslope, it is likely to trigger a ventricular tachycardia. Now this I'm going to show you how. So let's enlarge this one, and this is the normal QRS complex. Now this is the whole, these bars show the entire depolarization and repolarization process, okay? Ventricular, not atria. So initially the process starts simultaneously. All muscle cells, they start in the ventricle, they start depolarizing simultaneously, but their depolarization does not complete at the same time. This is because different myocytes, they have different sizes. Okay, this process starts together, but the portion of QRS, the portion of the ECG which corresponds to the downslope of the T wave, this is where the repolarization ends and the refractoriness ends. So there is differentiation. Some myocytes have recovered. These bars indicate refractoriness. So at this point, for example, this muscle has recovered and this one has not. At this point, this muscle has recovered and this one has not. And this would predispose to R on T. I'm going to explain it further by enlarging this picture. So this is the depolarization. This is repolarization. Please note that at the end of repolarization, there is some differentiation. Some muscle fibers have recovered. That means they are now responsive. Others have not yet recovered. That means they are still refractory. Okay, this is the complex. When ventricles are already depolarizing, this is an absolute refractoriness. No current can produce another depolarization. This phase is also refractory because all muscles are in still refractoriness. But this is the time, this phase shown here, some muscle fibers have recovered, others have not. Any current following here or here would find all the myocardial cells in a refractory state, so they will not respond. But if current falls here, then some muscle will fiber will respond, other will not. And by the time this muscle is responds in the form of depolarization, this will be ready to receive the current, and then other muscle may be ready, and this is how one after the other multiple muscle cells they depolarize and a ventricular tachycardia is sudden, and this is then followed by another refractoriness. I hope I was able to explain. Read more on this. This is an interesting. So any ectopic or depolarization in the form of DC shock which falls on the downslope of the T wave is likely to trigger a ventricular tachycardia. This is why we go for synchronized DC shock. This slide shows what we call couplets, just two VPCs occurring together. You know, this VPC and immediately followed by another VPC. No sinus beat intervening and no compensatory pause. So this may be a marker of ventricular tachycardia. This is actually couplets. We have triplets, we have quadruplets, and technically if we have 4 beats in a row, then we call it ventricular tachycardia. And similarly, if you have 3 or 4, then this one is triplet, 3 beats coming together, 3 VPCs coming together. This is triplets. But once we have 4 together, this is technically called a short run of ventricular tachycardia. So this is just the VPCs coming in groups. We call them couplets, triplets, and if it's more than 4, then we call it short run of tachycardia. Sometimes, of course, it can go on to develop tachycardias, which we will cover in our next module. So that completes our module on ectopic beats. But let me remind you, this was the second part of the total module. The first one covered atrial premature beats, junctional premature beats, and some common concept applicable to both. And the second one covered ventricular premature beats and also covered the comparison between ventricular premature beats and atrial premature beats, particularly in reference to compensatory pause. And I also explained how an ectopic beat can occasionally trigger a tachycardia. If it is ventricular premature beat, it would trigger a ventricular tachycardia, and if it is atrial, it could trigger an atrial premature beat, atrial tachycardia. So in both cases, the problem may become serious. So I would like to conclude here. Thank you for your attention. I am Professor Aziz-ur-Rehman from Medurstand. Thank you.